Hey, in 2008, I wrote a leadership book called Axioms, and it contained 76 of what I call leadership proverbs, short, punchy, memorable description of leadership truths that once you understand the power of these axioms, you can use them in your daily leadership challenges. So some of my favorite in that book were pay attention to the greetings and the goodbyes. Leaders are always in meetings. They call a bunch of people in their office or go to some other conference room. And how a leader greets people at the beginning of a meeting sets the tone for that meeting. And then if you have an animated meeting and it's coming to an end, instead of just letting people file out, pay attention to the goodbyes. You can thank the people who were at the meeting and say thanks for participating and giving your best. And so pay attention to the greetings and the goodbyes. Another axiom is leaders always take the high road. You can take a low road, you can take a medium road, and there's a high road. And my suggestion is always take the high road. Another one is deliver the bad news first. You know, if you've got 5 pieces of information, and one of them's kind of tough for people to hear, get that one out of the way first, and then the emotion can grow toward the positive side as the meeting goes on. Anyway, this weekend, I'd like to offer you an assortment of financial axioms. I hope that they will help you make your money behave as much as they have helped me over the years. So the first one is one that came from my father, and he used it often with all 5 of us kids. And here's the axiom, and you would say it with a dramatic flair. There is a huge difference between spending and saving. Now, you don't understand how profound this is, but you will in just a second. So one of my sisters would come home from a shopping spree, and at dinner, she would announce very excitedly to my dad that she had bought everything that day that was on sale, and she guessed just in her head that she had saved $75 that afternoon. She had saved $75. The rest of us would just start to duck because we knew it was coming. My dad would say, young lady, there's a huge difference between spending and saving. Watch me, he would say. He said, when you spend money, he'd do the hand motion. When you spend money, money goes away from you. Watch my hand now. It goes away from you. When you save money, money comes toward you and it stays right by you. It comes toward you. So, honey, by that definition, you'd ask my sister, did you spend or save money today? And she'd roll her eyes and she'd say, I guess I spent money today, Dad. And he wouldn't stop. He'd say, hey, did any money from those stores come to you? And did it stay close to you? And she said, no, that didn't happen. And he would just say, I want you to remember, there's a huge difference between spending and saving money. And this was really built into us. Do you need to see the hand motions one more time? Along these lines, sometimes a friend who was having car trouble would say to my father, Harold, my brakes are about shot on my car, so I'm thinking about buying a new car. My dad would ask, is the one you're driving now paid for? And they'd usually say yes. And then he'd say, other than the brakes, is the car reliable? Usually they'd say yes. And he'd say, do you have enough money saved up to buy the new car with cash? And most of the time the answer would be no. So my dad would say, just let me get this straight. Fixing the brakes on your current good running car is going to cost you about $400. But to save $400, from having to do that brake job, you're going to spend $400 a month for the next 48 months on the car payment in order to save that $400 brake job. Do I have that straight? And you could just, then he'd say, there's a huge difference between spending and saving. Do you need the hand motions one last time? All right, let's go on. Another one came from my father. Margin matters. Margin matters. And my father just pounded this into us. He'd say, Billy, if you work really hard someday, you might add value to an organization, and they might give you raises. Your earning power might increase over time. And he says, if you're really, really smart, you'll keep your living expenses very low so you can have Margin, and margin matters. Like, I'm 4 years old at the table when he's explaining this to me. And he goes, trust me on this. You'll thank me later. He says, because if you have margin, then you can put more into savings and investments, and you can give more to people in need and so. And then he'd bemoan the fact that most of his friends didn't give a rip about margin. And he'd always use cars as an illustration. He'd say, Billy, most of my friends, early in their careers, they all drove Chevys. And then they worked hard, and they got raises. And the minute they got a raise, they wouldn't put it into margin. They would go finance a Buick for 48 months. They'd go from a Chevy to a Buick, no additional margin. And then a couple years later, if they got another raise, then they'd go out and they would finance a Cadillac. And the trick, my dad would say, listen closely again, I'm young. And he goes, keep getting raises while hanging on to the Chevy. That's like the trick in all of this, because margin matters. It really matters. So it served me well my whole life. I'm 65 years old, and I drive a Ford. You were thinking of Chevy, but I never went to the Buick or the Cadillac, okay? Third financial axiom comes from Dr. B, my mentor of 45 years. And he is the least materialistic person I have ever known. If I know hundreds of you know him well, things just don't matter much to him. And he told me this story 35 years ago. I remember it like it was yesterday. He used to walk from his house in Wheaton to Wheaton College, where he was a professor. And he'd do that same walk all the time. One day he notices on a neighbor's porch a really cool sign. It was engraved and gold leaf painted, and it was really cool. I think it was the name of either the house or the people who owned the house. But anyway, it caught his attention, and every day when he would walk by that sign, he would look at it and he would say, oh, that's just about the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then the sign, day after day, would start calling out to him. And it's a mouthful for a sign to say, Dr. Gilbert Belezekian. But the sign, he said, was calling out to him that he needed to go buy one for his porch. And he told me how he became obsessed with this, and he knew it wouldn't fit in his budget, and his wife would get mad and so, but he was going to do it. He was going to go buy a sign like that. And one day as he's walking by that sign, and it's still calling out to him, he gets a brand new thought in his head. And here it is. I can admire it without having to acquire it. I can admire it without having to acquire it. Say it with me. I can admire it without having to acquire it. This will save you tens of thousands of dollars over the course of your life. Trust me, if you can learn that, you can admire something without having to acquire it. A friend of mine has the most beautifully engineered wristwatch I have ever seen in my life. It has more functions on it than the space shuttle. And it can keep perfect time on the ocean floor at 25,000 feet of water. Of course, you'd be dead, but the watch would be working just fine. It's really cool. So it costs more than the cars that many of us drive. But when we're hanging around every once in a while, I say, hey, can I check out that watch? And he goes, really? And I go, yeah, just let me check it out. It's heavy. Oh my gosh, it's heavy. I have to see 2 hands to hold it up if I put it on my wrist. And I'm just dazzled by its engineering and its design. It's really cool. While I have it, I check the stock market and I send a message to outer space. You can do anything with this watch, you see. And after I've admired it and used it for about 5 minutes, I feel absolutely no need to acquire it. So if there's someone right now sitting next to you with a nice watch, just borrow it for about 5 minutes. Play with it, give it back, and say, I can admire that without having to acquire it. It's magic. You really ought to try it sometime. Okay, here's the next one, number 4. Learn to be content with God's provision for your life. This is on the deep end of stuff, so stay with me. Learn to be content with God's provision for your life. Paul says in Philippians 4, I have learned, it's a skill, you have to work at it. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it's like to be in need. And if you know the story in the New Testament about Paul's life, he knew what it meant to be in great need. He also says, I know what it's like to have plenty. I had some ups in my life too. He said, but I have learned the secret of being content in any and every circumstance in my life. Now, for what it's worth, and I'm going to get a little more personal than I probably should, but for the sake of helping you understand something here, I have had some fairly wild financial swings in my life. You wouldn't think so, me just being, a pastor and so. The primary way that I pay the bills is through a generous compensation that the elders afford to me and my family. I have no say in what they pay me. They meet in a smoke-filled room. And I stand outside, then a cloud comes through the chimney, and that means I can come in, and then they tell me what I'm going to make, okay? So, and then I keep my expenses down here because my dad taught me about the, miracle of margin, so I always have margin there. And so in the early days of the church, man, there wasn't much money to pay the pastor, okay? And I came from a wealthy family, so I had to learn contentment at a level of provision that was lower than anything I had known in my whole life. I did not learn it overnight. And we had to take in boarders to make ends meet, and it was tough. But there's some valuable spiritual formation lessons that you can learn. Now, if you can be content with God's current level of provision for your life. Then, some years back, some very undiscerning people bought a whole bunch of books that I wrote. One particular book, I won't mention which one, sold 1 million copies in a fairly short period of time. And all of a sudden, God's provision level for my life was at a totally different altitude, okay? Can I give you a little side info on something? It wasn't really that hard for me to learn how to be content up here. That's like an overnight thing. I'm really content now, God, okay? You get how that goes. And learning lessons from my dad, keep on the Chevy level. So my expenses maybe went up a little, but not all that much. I wanted margin, and I learned how to be content up here. And I knew that after that book was done, then I was going to come back down here to the regular comp level that the church affords me, which is generous. I'm thankful for it. And then I adjusted back down here, and then I had to relearn what it's like to be content at this level of provision. And I've had some of those swings in my life. Now, I also have to be truthful about something, because some of you are going, yeah, but you don't know my story. And I don't. I've never really had a total financial devastation. And I thank God for it, because it's easy to happen. And I've been in some investments that could have gone really wrong, and learned some lessons there. But for those of you who have really gone to a level of near discouragement because of your finances, Paul would say, you can learn how to be content even with very little. And there's something to be learned there. And if yours goes up and down, man, just keep margin and don't buy into, all this stuff of living differently and so. But the main thing that I'm trying to tell you here is, when you learn to be content with God's current level of provision for your life, you will avoid the trap of axiom 5, which is debt. And here's what debt really is, if you want a description of it. Debt is telling God, this is the true spiritual definition of debt. It's you telling God that his current level of provision for your life is simply not enough. He's got his wires crossed. He didn't figure out your equation right. So debt is telling God that his current level of provision for your life is just not enough, and then it's arranging how to get more for yourself. That's what it is. It's a very spiritual concept. Most of us just think of credit cards and just say, I do what everybody does and stuff. When you really understand the teaching of Scripture, your current level of provision from God is not an accident. God's trying to teach you something. I don't know what it is, but he's trying to teach you something at your current level of provision. Because he could up it or lower it easily. He's sovereign. But what we need to do is be content and really try to avoid debt. Trying to say, God, it's not enough, so I will go to another level using the vehicle of debt. I often watch ads on television, and I listen to the voice of the person who's doing the ad, and almost all these ads start by saying, you deserve a lot better than what you're driving now. My gosh, someone like you deserves a such and such. Your kitchen, oh, you deserve a better kitchen. My gosh, look at this kitchen. This is what you deserve. And we buy into it and we say, hey, God, how come your current level of provision for my life isn't providing that new kitchen? And I think you got your wires crossed, so I'm going to borrow 25 grand and I'm going to put in that kitchen that I deserve. And it's very close to spiritual treason to point your finger at God and say, you have your wires crossed. So I'm going to provide for myself what you won't provide for me. So this is probably a little bit more serious a deal than you would think through at first. And if you buy into this debt thing long enough, then you're going to go into axiom number 6, which is just no fun at all. The borrower, you know this text, is a slave to the lender. Christ followers who go deeply into debt often find themselves in a double bind within their soul. On the one hand, being in a relationship with Christ is liberating. Jesus said, whom the Son sets free shall be free indeed. You're free from sin and shame and fear and guilt and all the rest. And you feel it viscerally. You're like, man, I'm free. But that joyful liberation spirit often gets substantially snuffed out by the crushing bondage of debt. Some of the saddest Christ followers I know live each day with the dark cloud of debt hanging over their heads, and they can't feel free indeed in Christ because they're so in bondage to debt. And I want to say something just as honestly as I can. Some of you are beating yourself up right now because you got in a mess and you're in debt more than you wish you were, and you're just like, oh, I'm such an idiot. And you expend a lot of energy berating yourself. And I would say, listen, everybody makes mistakes. Just chill on that. You made a mistake. That's not the end of the world. Maybe you committed a sin or of something. It's not the unpardonable sin. My advice is always to simply take that energy that you're using to berate yourself and convert it to getting on the solution side and starting to pay off that debt. Put your energy to the positive side of the equation instead of just berating yourself. Can you hear this? I hope you can, because there's too many people just beating themselves up. It doesn't help anything. So stay away from debt. I'll say that as straightforwardly as I can. As I've said it in past years, I used to say hate debt, and then I wanted to say it stronger, so I said hate it with a passion. And then a couple years ago, I said hate it like you hate the Green Bay Packers. And everybody understood when I brought it to that level. Now, I also need to be clear about another thing. The Bible isn't totally anti-debt. There's no single passage that says you should never. It always warns you about destructive debt. But if you need a reasonable mortgage for a house or something, or a growing business, you need a loan along those lines. We carry debt here as a church through some of our eras. Some of our regional campuses are going to have to carry some debt for a while. But the general rule is go into debt as slowly. In other words, think about it as long as you can first. Borrow the least amount you can possibly borrow. Pay it off as fast as you possibly can so that the debt cloud can be removed and you can feel the joyfulness of being liberated in Christ. Yeah, okay, we good? Let's switch subject matters fast. Here's the next axiom. There is enormous power in advanced decision making. Advanced decision making. I think you know where I'm going with this. Last week, I argued the case as persuasively as I could that God has given all of you dominion, control over your money. Money will behave if you tell it what to do. And so what the challenge is for us to sit down and have a meeting in advance about how we're going to spend our money in the future. This is where families get it wrong so often. Now, in most work environments, if you're in a company, in an NGO, or even like in this church, we have all kinds of meetings during budgeting season where we pray and we fast and we ask God, what we should do. And then we all come into alignment and then we say, okay, now we have a plan. We've made an advanced decision about how money is going to be spent the next year, and then you simply execute on the plan. But I meet with so many people who get into trouble, and I say, now this, as we discussed last week, this is God's plan for an approach to how you can manage money. And if someone says they're way out of whack on this, I'll simply ask them, did you ever have a meeting? And they'll go like, what do you mean? I like a sit-down meeting with you and your spouse or you and whoever, and where you take all the books out and you say, I'm going to decide prayerfully, not during halftime at the Super Bowl, I'm going to decide prayerfully how I should honor God with my money, and you put this kind of plan together, and then you can enjoy the rest. And once you have that plan together, then you just execute on that plan throughout the rest of the year. And there's so much less drama in your life if you will plan and pray and have a meeting and then just kind of execute on that budget. Now, by the way, I asked the last two services and the hand raise thing didn't work, so I won't ask again in this service. But many of you, I know, employ the services of like an executive coach because you want to get better as a leader. Many of you have personal trainers because you need the accountability of meeting with a trainer periodically to be fit and healthy. Some of you have mentors, or you take tennis lessons or music lessons, vocal lessons, and so, because you understand that if you're with someone who knows more than you and who will hold you accountable, it helps you. So you're going to think I'm stark raving mad, but for the last 25 years, I have paid a CPA. It was actually Shauna's leader in Elevate many, many years back, but I pay a woman a small amount of money to meet with me for 15 minutes every single week. Do you believe that? With my schedule, I do this. If I'm in town, I meet with her for 15 minutes every week. And if I'm out of town, we communicate by email. But she makes commentary on my spending, on my saving, on my giving, on opportunities for better approaches to taxation and all these kinds of things. Every 30 days, included in the fee I pay her, she provides me with a full monthly statement, complete with graphs and charts, so that I know exactly where I am on the pre-agreed upon plan, and if I'm executing on it. And I'm telling you, 15 minutes of accountability every 7 days keeps me on the straight and narrow, okay? So some of you, again, you might just contemplate how this could help you. Find the right person for a small fee. Maybe you don't need to meet every week. I'm an idiot. But if you want to do it once a month, that's fine. But that's axiom number 8. Arrange accountability. It will help you in amazing ways. Do you have an appetite for just a few more axioms, or do I have to stop right now? Can I give you a couple more? Oh, it was just overwhelming. You're bowling me over. Stop. Okay, I'll give you just a couple more. All right, here's one that I learned a long time ago. Number 9, never buy something that you couldn't freely share with somebody. Never buy something that you can't freely share with somebody. I learned this when I was a senior in high school, and I'm kind of embarrassed about it, but it's just true. I'd worked very hard in junior high and early in high school, and had to deal with my dad. When I was a senior, he would pay for half of a new car. I'd pay for the other half, pay him off later, and so. And I bought, as a senior in high school, a brand new 1970 Pontiac GTO. I'm telling you, it was smoking hot. It made women scream and dogs bark. But I got a little over-involved in the maintenance of this thing. And so, normally you wax a car, twice a year? I get into a deal where I was waxing it like twice a week. I mean, it was jet black. And you could bring the finish on this thing so that, you could comb your hair on the side if you wanted to. I used to watch flies coming down to try to land on the hood. I'd have to turn away because they'd slip and break their legs. And so it's just a terrible thing. And so I happened to start dating Lynn when I had that car. And she was so impressed that I always opened the door for her. Only about 6 weeks into it, she realized it was just so that she wouldn't dig her fingernails in to the paint. So I painted the underside of the car. You have to do that. And after I did that, I thought, well, I don't want to ever drive it in the snow, so I never did. And then I got a little more crazy about this car, and I decided I couldn't drive it in the rain. Well, then I had to buy a second car to drive so when it looked like it was going to rain, okay? And then I got it so perfect, I never did want to drive it because it was perfect, see? So then one day, out of the blue, a very close friend of mine calls and says, hey, my car broke down. Can I borrow the GTO? I'm like, dude, I don't even let myself drive it. I'm not going to let you drive it. My gosh. And it was shortly after that I realized I had to sell that car because I had gotten goofed up in my head about it. And I wasn't free to share it. And I made a decision. I was 17 or so at the time. I am never, ever going to buy anything that I can't share with my friends, ever. So, you want to drive my Ford for a couple days? I'm going on an international trip. You're welcome to it. But think about this. If you're going to go out and buy a piece of furniture that you never want anyone to ever sit on, don't buy it. If you're ever going to buy an outdoor grill but you won't let anyone cook on it, don't buy it, okay? Just make that a general rule. Can you all hear that one? Then you can share more freely. Okay. Number 10, renting is a beautiful concept. Many of my friends rent various pieces of lawn and garden equipment a few times a year so that they don't have to tie up cash by buying it, garage space, they don't have to maintain it. They just rent it when they need it. It's beautiful. Some of my friends who have cars with a lot of miles on it, and the cars are generally reliable around town, but every Thanksgiving they got to drive 500 miles to grandma's, okay? And then 500 miles back, and maybe the car isn't meant for that. And so they go to Enterprise and do a 2-day rental and put 1,000 miles on a rental car, and they'll come back and they'll crawl in Old Faithful and pat it on the dashboard and say, I still love you, I still love you. More and more of my friends just rent a summer house or a cottage for a week or two instead of loading themselves up with debt and taxes and maintenance cost of owning a second home. Renting is beautiful. We were on a vacation some time ago, and my son Todd loves boating. He sailed around the world, you know that story. And so we rented a small boat for a day so we could go around the waters. We were in a warm climate. And we brought the boat back to the dock at the end of the day at the rental place, and they checked it out and realized we hadn't damaged anything. And as Todd and I were walking down the dock, he goes, you know what a great feeling I have right now, Dad? Really a great feeling? I said, no, what is it? And he says, we're just walking away from that boat. We don't have to polish it, pay for it, maintain it. You know, we're just walking away from it. Rental can be a beautiful concept. Here's another one just for free, number 11. Set financial goals. This is very motivational to some people, not to others, I know. But if you have a savings goal and you kind of get a head of steam up on reaching that savings goal in a given year, or an investment goal, when to have your house paid off goal, I mean, it can get very motivational, and then you go out and celebrate and blow a bunch of money in your back in the hole. But just celebrate inexpensively, all right? There's a guy on our staff who 15 years ago, and the guy's still on our staff now, pulls me aside one day and he said, I have a goal of giving X amount, staggering amount, he said, to the purposes of God before I die. And my reflex thought was, I don't think your earnings levels are ever going to be high enough to reach that goal. But I just kept that to myself. And when I bump into him every once in a while, I say, do you still have that goal? He said, absolutely. And he goes, I don't know if I'll ever hit it, but it motivates me. So some of you could have a goal like that. Okay, here's another one. This is on the newer side for me. And again, you're going to say, now I think even less of you than I did before. Tip others as you would like being tipped if you were in their shoes. I made a mistake. I made a mistake for many years, like in a restaurant situation, to only look at the percentage of what a tip should be. It was just math. And over the last several years, God has really grabbed a hold of me and said, Bill, don't just look at the percent. Look at the person who's been serving you and put yourself in their shoes. Sometimes if I'm at a place having a dinner, I learn the server, this is a second job, and they're trying to go to school on the side, and sometimes it's a third